Okay, now that we've got some basic elements of our track going on, it's time to make it sound better and more interesting. Okay, and we're going to do that with a variety of effects. Now let's start with EQ, and there's two in Ableton. There's an EQ 8 and an EQ 3. And the 8 and the 3 just refer to the different bands of frequency, or the amounts of bands of frequency that we can manipulate. So let's start with the bass, shall we? Let's highlight the bass. Two ways of adding an EQ device. We can either click, drag and hold and drop it on like so, or undoing that, we can just double click, and as long as the track that is highlighted, the one we want it to go onto, double clicking, we'll place it right on there. Your default EQ might not look like mine. I've actually saved it with a little bit of a high pass here and a little bit of a low pass, mainly because those are the two elements of EQing that I am 99 times out of 100 going to change. And the great thing about the EQ8 is we can, by clicking this button, get a really good full screen view of it. Now EQ is one of the most simple and straightforward tools that we can use to manipulate our sound. And we can do that by EQing or equalizing different frequencies of the sound. And these frequencies are split into 8 different bands here. At the moment you can see 1 to 4 and number 8 are enabled. So we can enable or disable little points here. So with just 1, we can click and hold this and we can drag it around. Okay. So if I just concentrate on this first band for the moment. Clicking here, we have filter options. A high pass filter, which is only going to let the high elements of the track pass through. Let's come out of here briefly. And what we want to do is solo our bass. So that's this button here. Now it just means now that we're only going to hear the bass. Let's click on the first section, Command and L to loop it. Let's press play. And now as I drag around the filter, you can see we're losing a lot of the bass there. And we can also what's called boosting and cutting up and down various frequencies within the track. Let's disable our metronome so we can increase the bass here. As it is a bass track, we generally don't want to lose too much at the bottom end, so I'm going to keep that quite near the end there. Let's click on a new one here, and this filter we are going to choose this one, which is called a bell, as the shape it takes, you see. So now we can boost or cut certain parts of the bass. Now sometimes in the bass, some of the low mid area around here, around the 250 Hertz area, can sound a bit muddy, so what we can do is drop some of that out. But generally when you're cutting an EQ, you don't want such a wide spread here because we're going to be losing a lot of fundamental parts of the sound. So what you can do is narrow what's called the Q, and that's here. So we click and drag down, increases it, and dragging up, narrows it. So now we can drag around. Take out various parts. There's nothing I don't like there, so what we're going to do is just disable that. Now with the higher element of the bass, do we want to keep that in there? Let's enable the low pass filter. And we don't have to use number 8 to do this. You can choose any number and change it to a low pass here, you see. It's just number 8 is my default. Let's deselect it so I can continue here. So if you want some of that clicky noise to come through on the bass, we can boost it up around here. If you want to sound nice and deep and dark, we can take all of the mids and high end out. As we want space for our higher elements in the track, we're going to cut off some of the higher end of the bass here. Okay, let's select the clap now. Need to rename this, Command and R, claps. And let's put an EQ 8 on this one. We're going to also solo the claps this time. The loop brace is in the right place. Let's give ourselves a bit more view. Now you can hear on the recording there's lots of background noise. So we can eliminate a lot of that low end rumble. And you can hear we're still getting the fundamental sound of the clap. So let's take away a little bit of the high. And let's play with one of these bell curves. See if there's a part of the clap that we like and we want to accentuate. I think maybe some of these high mids sound nice and crispy. It might help it cut through the mix a little more. Okay, so let's hear what that was like before and after. All right. And lastly, let's put a bit of EQ on these keys. I'm going to leave the drums now because there's lots of elements of the drum kit all in just one audio loop there. And in one of the following chapters where we put together separate parts of a drum beat, that's when I can EQ each element of the kit individually and get it to sound really good. So we'll leave the drum loop for now. Let's have a look at the keys. We'll drop an EQ 8 on here and give it a play. It's already soloed, ready to go. Now you can, although it's not audible, there's lots of low rumble here, which if you were to leave on several parts of the track, then it could all add up and you might find that your overall mix gets a little bit muddy. So what we need to do is make sure that we cut it out with this high pass filter. And let's brighten it up a little bit. Number 4 we have here is called a high shelf, and it's wider and we can affect a larger part of the top end here. Okay, that's a nice amount brighter. Alright, so here I just showed you how I EQ some of the tracks individually when just listening to them on their own. And this isn't always the best idea. Sometimes it's a really good idea to EQ tracks whilst you can hear everything that they're playing next to at the same time. And this is so that you're not just influenced by one single sound. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to unsolo here and just loop this part here. What I'm going to do is duplicate these claps so that we have every element of the song so far playing together, so that we can adjust the levels now. I'm going to go into session view for this so that we can see the channel strips more clearly. Now you can see my claps here are clipping, going above 0 dB, and in turn, if you look at our master track here, it's well into the red. So let's bring all these volumes down. Okay, that's great. So the reason I've brought all the levels down here is because we were clipping in the master bus. This is not a good idea, as when you bounce down your audio, once you're finished, you could get some digital distortion on there, which sounds really, really nasty. So it's best to keep your faders low here if you can, and make sure that these aren't, or Well, they're close to 0 dB, but not really going over. We want to keep it around about between -6, -2 decibels. Okay, let's do some simple panning here. The bass we want to be right down the middle. I'm not going to adjust that. Let's have the keys out to the left. And maybe the claps out to the right. So we've got a nice little stereo feel going on there. Alright, so now we've done some basic EQing on our tracks. It's time to move on to the next effect, and that is compression. So compression is a huge topic really, and it's something beginners struggle to understand. So I'm going to try and put this as simply as I can. The primary use of a compressor is to even out the volume of your audio, or to even out the dynamic range. So with our clap here, although this is not the best example, because most of our hits are quite even. A lot of the time in audio you might have one very low clap and one that's too high and peaks way too high and is too loud. And you might have a few that are of extreme different levels. A compressor is going to help to lift the low parts, and it's also going to help to attenuate the parts that are too loud. And this is so that your audio can sit more evenly in the mix without it clipping, and all parts can get heard when they need to. So let's have a look at our clap here. We're going to solo it for a second. And let's go over to session view. And you can see quite clearly here that we're clipping right about there, which is something we need to bring down. So let's grab a compressor, drag and drop onto our device section here. What I'm going to do first is switch off the makeup gain. Okay, so the makeup gain automatically compensates the output level. Right, so we don't want any extra gain here. Make sure that peak is selected. Don't worry about the other two options, but peak just ensures that it's going to focus on the short peaks, which is great for things like claps, snares, etc. Let's set the ratio first of all. Now, the default is 2:1, so that means for every 2 decibels of input above the threshold level that we set, it's going to only increase the output by 1 decibel. Okay, now we have quite a high volume here. Let's hear it in context of the track. If we pull it too low, you can hear it just gets lost in the mix of the drums. So we do need the volume, but we don't like it peaking and distorting over and above 0 dB. So let's set our ratio a bit higher. We're going to go up to 6:1. And because we are working with a very fast and quick sound, we're going to bring the attack all the way down. And this is how quickly the compression is going to happen once we exceed the threshold. All right, let's solo and have a play here and a listen. So you can see, before I've even reduced the threshold, we've already got some gain reduction happening here. So I'm only going to drop the threshold, let's say about 3 dB. And now you can see all of the claps are much more even. And so we can increase our overall output, giving us some nice headroom before we get to 0 dB. Let's hear this in context now. So it's a lot more even, sits much more nicely in the mix, and there's no peaking, and the lower claps are still heard. Okay, I'm going to do some housekeeping here because, as I mentioned earlier, with compression, it does lift the quiet parts of your audio as well. So if we go back to arrangement view, that lifting of the quiet parts is a little bit problematic, because if you just listen to our claps here, there's quite a lot of background noise. So what we're going to do is some rough editing here. We're going to click it and highlight the parts where the clap's not playing, and simply press backspace to delete them. So let's just get rid of these. Now You can zoom in and be a lot more accurate than I am, but just for time, let's get rid of those ones there. Then, if we wanted to move these around, we could, but if we wanted it all to be one complete section to move around, we click, drag, highlight the whole area, and then we're going to press Command and J, and that has consolidated those parts into one brand new clip. So we now have silence where those parts that we were took out. Let's listen to that on its own now. So there we go, we've cleaned it up nicely. Let's take a look at the return tracks now. The return tracks are used to host different effects. Now normally reverbs, delays, ones that you're likely to want to add to more than one sound at a time. And this is a nice way of saving CPU of the computer. It's also a nice way of affecting more elements of your track with the same effect. So let's start with the keys. At the moment they're sounding really dry. Let's have a quick listen again. Dry as an old bone. So how about having a reverb to send some of our keys signal to? So with the return track A highlighted, we're going to find the reverb, drag and drop on here, just like we do with any other device on the individual tracks. Because this is a return channel, we want the dry and wet signal to be 100%. Okay, and before we adjust any of the settings here, let's send some of our keys sound into that reverb. And we do that by clicking here and increasing the amount. So this is the send amount. If we put it all up, see we've got a lot of reverb happening there on the keys, maybe too much, so let's back it off. Okay, and now it's quite spacious, so let's go to the reverb and we can reduce the decay time. Okay, so the decay time is the amount of time that the tail drops off after its initial sound. So the smaller the decay time, the smaller the room it sounds like you're working in. Epic. Okay. Just want a bit of character. So 1 second's working nicely there. Now, the good thing is about having this reverb on the return channel is that we can also send in some other parts of our track to the same channel, to the same reverb. So let's do that with the claps. Now, if we want to listen to keys and claps together on their own, we can, and one of them's already soloed, hold down the Command or Control key, click on S, and then we have both of these soloed now. Okay, so let's bring in some reverb for our claps. There we go. So it's sounding like it's got a lot more character now. Let's hear that in the mix. Okay, we're getting there with some nice sounds now. How about with the keys? We have a little bit of delay on them because there is some gaps between the notes, which is nice. But what about if we have some nice reflections coming off of those notes? We can do that with a delay. And Ableton has a great and simple one called, namely, Simple Delay. So we can have that on a separate return channel. Let's drag and drop onto return channel B. Okay, and you can see here we've got the different beat divisions for the left and right channel, and these represent the different delay times. Okay, let's turn the dry wet once again up to 100%. The feedback is going to increase the amount of delays that we hear. Alright, so with the beat divisions on quarter notes for the left and let's say eighth notes for the right, with a little bit of feedback. Let's press play. And now with the keys, let's solo the keys for this. So now we're on to return track B. Let's send some in. So listening to that in context now. There we go, we've given some lovely space and ambience to the track now.